This is thought to be from a shallow grave from a few hundred years ago, this dip, where some skulls were found. And if you follow me around the corner, I'll tell you the story of how the shallow grave was discovered. According to legend, obviously there was a tree here once, but just on the tree was a gibbet. So Rob Voysey was a highwayman. I'll read you the whole story, but you can see the highway is behind you, and obviously there used to be a lot of traffic go along there, not vehicles, not cars, but horses in carts taking stuff around. So there was quite a lot of pickings around this area for highwaymen. And it says in the tale that at the point where an ancient lane leading from Basildon village enters Nevendon Woods, just over back behind where we came in, there once stood a gibbet. That's what's supposed to have been here, containing the mortal remains of notorious highwayman Rob Voysey. Voysey's criminal career was short and began early. Sole surviving child of a respectable cordwainer, Voysey was always a troublesome boy, given to drunken boasting, petty theft and frequent brawling. I know a few children like that myself. He left home at the age of 12 following the mysterious disappearance of old Abraham Voysey, his God-fearing and long-suffering father. Abraham was never heard from or seen again, and it was rumoured locally that his son had murdered him. Voysey took up with another young miscreant by the name of Rob Vane, and together they carried out a series of highway robberies. Armed with cudgels and butcher's knives, they attacked numerous servant girls and religious dissenters, many of whom later died of their injuries. The booty to be got from such easy prey was limited, and this paucity led to frequent arguments between Voysey and Vane over division of the spoils. Following one particularly unsatisfactory haul, just a nail and a pie, the two robbers set about each other with their cudgels and Vane was killed. Voysey's next venture in criminality was the theft of livestock, because obviously there would have been a lot of livestock and cows and sheep and everything around this area. He joined a gang of sheep stealers who arrived in Basildon on the run from a posse in Croydon. It is not commonly known that the raising of a posse, a citizens' volunteer law and order force, originated in 18th century England. Voysey ingratiated himself with the gang by claiming to have invaluable knowledge about local farmers that could be used to blackmail them into keeping quiet about the loss of their sheep. When it became clear that this was not the case, an argument ensued and Voysey was badly beaten. His assailants only left off because they had all been drinking heavily for some days and they passed out more or less simultaneously. A lot of drinking went on in those days. Interestingly though, the bodies of the four-man gang were discovered in Nevendon bushes, their skulls stove in with a rock. That's just over in the shallow little dugout area that we walked past. Voysey though next turned to forgery of a sort. He was arrested for trying to pass off a shiny pebble as Africa money. Having been sentenced to death, forgery was a capital offence at the time, he and an accomplice escaped Basildon jail by squeezing between the bars of their cell. The accomplice's body was later discovered in Nevendon bushes, his skull stove in with a rock. Little is known about the remainder of Voysey's life. A young man matching Voysey's description and calling himself Vasey, cordwainer by trade, disappeared from Basildon following the murder of his common law wife, a prostitute. He was finally brought to justice when, following the robbery at knife point of his mother, he went to the nearest tavern with his haul of 2 shillings and got drunk, loudly claiming all the while that he had been in Africa and made his fortune there. He was arrested, tried and hanged for sheep stealing. He was 15. And just here is where the gibbet was. So that's a little bit about Rob Voysey. We'll move on. Okay, ladies and gents, we'll take a stop here for the next of the Nevendon Tales. And Nevendon bushes is all that remains of a great forest. once renowned for the richness of its stocks of wild boar and roaming deer that would all have been running through this whole area. It is not surprising, therefore, that hunting in these woods has generated its own myths and legends. Most ancient of these concern the deity or demigod Basil, or Bavil, or Banal, the owl-headed hunter. According to the legend, believed to date back to pre-Roman times, Basil the hunter resembles an owl, not in appearance, but in the ability to rotate his head through 180 degrees and shoot his bow backwards. Basil always appears accompanied by his pack of hounds, themselves gifted with all-round vision, since each dog has an extra eye on the end of its tail. Just check, Melanie, see what? Hunters lived in fear of coming across Basil and his pack. The legend had it that anyone unlucky enough to set eyes on them would immediately be pounced upon and dragged down to hell. By the early Middle Ages, the hunting of big game in England had become the preserve of the land-owning classes, so all the rich with their own land. And so the pre-Christian myth of Basil became fused with the feudal gentry's fear and hatred of poachers. The demigod myth became a bogeyman, the faceless hunter, or the hunter with the reversed head, or sometimes, less imaginatively, the headless hunter. It seems likely that the deer poachers themselves were responsible for many of these ghost stories. Poaching was a very serious offence, punishable in the first instance by the severing of the middle and four fingers of both hands, so these two fingers, i.e. the fingers used in drawing a longbow, and in the next by boiling alive. It was therefore very much in the poacher's interest to discourage landowners or their gamekeepers from entering the forest at night, obviously so they weren't caught. One typical tale concerns a gamekeeper who, upon entering a moonlit clearing in Nevendon bushes, spies from behind a figure clearly busy at work of butchering a recently slain stag. The gamekeeper calls out to the hunched and hooded figure to desist or be killed. Furious at being ignored, the gamekeeper rushes up and, pulling him round by the shoulder, confronts him face to face. Except there is no face, just the back of a hairy head. Now there's an intriguing footnote to this story which may provide a rational explanation. It is known that a family lived somewhere out in the forest at some point in the mid-14th century. They were obliged to live as outlaws and pariahs because they had a terrifying congenital disfigurement. This rare condition, which is now known as hirsutism, caused the sufferer to grow hair on every part of the body, their face included. So this is a little clearing, obviously in Nevendon bushes. It's a kind of bog there, but according to legend that hasn't always been there. So the next of the Nevendon Tales that we have is called An Affair of Honour. And we all know what duelling is, don't we? Duelling has been illegal in England since the reign of King James I. And as a consequence of this, the most secluded clearings of Nevendon Wood were the resort for many a bloody assignation. So, because it was illegal, if you were going to have a duel over something, you needed to get as far away from where people were going to find you, because otherwise you could be arrested, you could be hanged or whatever. So people would come to a place like this to do it. An account of one of these encounters is to be found in Dr. W. Wem's A Basildon Physician, which was published in 1846. The cause of the dispute between the two anonymous gentlemen, known only as X and Y, is not clear, although Wem says that one overheard the other discussing his neckerchief, which does not seem serious enough to an insult to warrant the gravity of his outcome. Whatever the cause, a challenge was issued and accepted, and it fell upon Dr. Wem to attend as surgeon.